record. Are we going? We are. Okay, so welcome to the workshop on literacy searches that is being held here for sponsored by the Student Center for Research, Creativity, and Scholarship. We have a panel of faculty today who are going to talk to you about effective literacy or literature searches and why they're important and what we need to do, etc. And what I'm going to do is just take a real quick few minutes and let each of you introduce yourselves, because that way we'll be sure to have your names pronounced correctly, and you can tell us just real quickly your name and where you work, and then we'll go ahead and ask some questions. So maybe we could start, Dr. Rena, with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kresge, for giving me the opportunity to be part of this panelist, and I truly appreciate that. I am Dr. Ismatara Rina. I'm originally from Bangladesh. I am working here in School of Kinesiology's Health Promotion and Wellness Program. I started in spring 2020. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you. And Dr. Sandos?
My name is Emily Sandoz. I'm in the Department of Psychology in the College of Liberal Arts, and I started in 2010. This is year 11 for me.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, and Dr. Ellis, would you want to go ahead and tell us about you?
I am Tiffany Ellis, and I am a librarian here at Dufresne Library. I do user engagement, and I'm also an instruction librarian.
Wow, okay, so lots of different hats here. So thank you, ladies, for being willing to be on our panel. And I'm just going to jump right into it. And so, Dr. Sandos, you get the first question. And the first question, which of course each panelist is going to answer, but we'd just like you to lead out, which is, why is effective literature search important?
Yeah, I love this question. The biggest thing that I try to sort of train my students to think about is contextualizing their interests and their work in everything else that's been done. Now, the everything else that's been done can feel really overwhelming. So really what I mean by that is, the questions that we have, the observations that we make, and I'm a behavioral scientist. So, what I train my students to do is little observations that they make out in the world. If they can sort of bring those observations then to the literature and see what's already out there, what have other folks who wear this same behavioral science hat, how have they manipulated the world? How have they, created experimental procedures? How have they even conceptualized this? So the literature search is effective if it helps us to know how other scientists, in my case, helps us to know how people are talking about this phenomenon of interest. What words are they using to kind of wrap around it? What are some of the ways that people have modeled that in the laboratory or tested it, in self-report? We do human subject research. How have people measured that, conceptualized it? And then what have their findings been? Where are the holes in their findings? Where does this observation that you've made casually in kind of moving around your world, how might we test that in keeping with how the rest of the scientific community will understand it, will appreciate it, and in a way that sort of adds to what the rest of the community has done. I'll tell students, you can make a logic case. That's kind of the weakest case in scientific writing. You can make a logic case. You can make a theoretical case, it's a little bit stronger, but making a data-based case where you're saying this is what's out there already, here are the data, and allowing that to justify your questions, your methods, and your conclusions, that's the ideal. So the first step then is seeing what's actually out there and how folks are talking about it.
Wonderful. Yeah, I really like thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I love the database part of what you had to say. That was awesome. Dr. Rena, do you have something you'd like to maybe add?
I think what Dr. Sanders says is to cover everything about literature search, why it is important. Identifying the research portion is the most important part, which has to include the key elements to search the literature.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Dr. Ellis, what about you? Again, just anything that you'd like to add?
Well, I do want to add that, it's about also identifying those gaps in knowledge. What haven't people talked about or wrote about? And that can kind of help guide you on where you want to go. But also it's writing a paper is kind of like going into a room with people already talking and you want to talk, but you need to first survey the room and see what are other people saying? What have they already said? You don't want to jump into a conversation and repeat what someone just said. So it's just kind of like, kind of like reading the room first before you say, this is what I have to say. This is what I have to add. You have to first know what other people are saying in order to add to that.
It keeps the conversation flowing.
Right.
And I think one thing as a scientist also in the life sciences, so I'm a biologist, that I like is sometimes it's okay to repeat an experiment to provide support for what someone said. So it can offer some real interesting things. And I'd like to take this minute before I ask the next question to tell the audience who's here, the students who are here, that if you have a question, if you go ahead and put it into the chat, that we have our graduate student who's really been a wonderful help in terms of getting this going, Nirmal Gope, who is watching that, say, hey, Nirmal, and he will ask your question, or you're welcome to just hop in and ask your question. And so with that said, I'm going to ask the next question. So Dr. Arena, if you'll lead this one out. So the next question is, what qualifies as effective literature search and how does a student start the process of completing this task?
As Dr. Sanders says, why it is important, definitely following the steps to complete that things is another important steps. So first steps, as I said, that is the foundation of effective literature search is identify your research topics, what is your interest, and develop the research question, which has the keywords you will be using to search. So that could be the foundation and first steps to start with. Then when you have the research question, what you will do? So you have to have that research question with the keywords. So now you have to find what is out there. And you have to read those and find the gap and try to fill in the gap with your own work. So it is a time-consuming process. Definitely you start with patience, that it will take time. And if you follow the steps-wise process, then you will do it. If you don't follow that, if you are not in that steps, in some point, you will feel like that, okay, I cannot continue that. It is very tiring, but it is the most important process of your scholarly journey. So with that research question, I am in a health, I have some background in education. So I can think of research question which is come with the health type of topics. So say, for example, I have a research question that if I want to see the impact of obesity on adolescents' psychological development. So I want to give some room for Dr. Sanders to give some input on my topic. So I use the word psychology. So there is a keywords, at least 3 of them is obesity, adolescents, and the psychological impact. So when you are searching, find the search tool which is related to your topics. Definitely the discipline-wise, there is different search tool. I usually use the PubMed, Web Science. I use ERIC, which stands for Educational Resources Information Center, PsycInfo, Google Scholar. I love Google Scholar. I don't know why, but what I found is there that when you search the Google Scholar, you can use the whole research question. You don't have to use just keywords. But if you go for any other tools, you have to go for the keywords. So when you use the whole research question, you will get the articles related to that topics. And bottom of that, you can see the citation of that research article. So if you click that, you will get the latest additional articles in your related topics. So it will enrich your collection. And so that is the steps to identify the research tool. Then when you found the research, you feel like that it's related to your research question, then you will organize them. The first steps, you cannot read the whole thing for all of them if you have a few hundreds. So go for the abstract, review the abstract. Through that, you will narrow down or coincide that number of articles you will get. So you will be using now the citation manager to cite those things. And you can create your own annotation table. I use that. I create one. Basically, I got from my advisor, my dissertation advisor, like a table, how to annotate, like first column, you will write the author's name and year, then title, then just what are the research participants, what are the significance result, that things. So you have that, which one you want. So through those review of the abstract, you can select your important useful articles. Then you will be reading those full text and create an annotation. After creating the annotation, you will be grouping them based on theme. So theme wise, then you can write a paragraph. So those will be the common steps to start an effective literature review. And
Wow. that is, and I love the fact that you put, with all the steps, it shows that there's an effort put in here. There's a plan, and having that plan and that effort's important. But I like it that you said it helps organize you. When I did my master's, I kind of tried to push this off to the end. Worst decision ever. So I love that you like do it now. So Dr. Ellis, is there something more you'd like to add? Considering that, like, again, let me remind you what qualifies as an effective literature search, and how does a student start the process?
And of course, being a librarian, I would say start here at the library. Ask one of us, to help you if you need help. But we actually, a lot of the steps, we actually have different tools that can help you. So if we are searching, say, on Google Scholar, there are ways where you can see some of the items that we have at the library that'll pull up in Google Scholar and go directly to there. If you're on the library and you're finding an article, for example, or a book, we have the abstract listed there, so you can read the abstract ahead of time. We have citation tools that cites it for you in almost every single citation style. We also have research guides that can help you in terms of you looking at citation management systems or platforms that can go into that. So there are a lot of different resources that we can help you with, even if you don't realize that it's out there yet. We can kind of show you some things that get you started on your literature search.
Absolutely. And our next question, and Dr. Santos, I'm going to come back to you in just a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and just jump into that third question that I have, which is where and how to get help with searching for literature. And of course, Dr. Ellis already said to us, the library, what a great idea. We've already heard the library, we've heard Google Scholar, we've heard PubMed, we've heard some other resources. And so, Dr. Santos, let me throw it to you. Is there some things you'd add to that? And just either the second question or this one, if you just want to expand, go right ahead.
Sure. The only thing that I would add is I think that sometimes students or new researchers really have this experience of thinking that their job is to go out and consume all of the research, all of the literature, and to do it all at once. And one of the things that I try to help them to kind of get to is that the point at which they're kind of, I call it like chopping off whole chunks of the literature and deciding that's not going to be relevant. So maybe I decide I'm not broadly interested in psychological impacts. Maybe I start there with broadly psychological impact, but then I discover that there's so much on that. It's not a new question. There's so much on that. So then I decide I'm going to focus just on stress and anxiety. Well, then everything related to depression, I can throw out. Everything related to, whatever, I can throw out. That idea of sort of setting aside and gradually narrowing the body of literature that's closest to my research question or my research interest or my methods. And I don't know that students always sort of, or new researchers, I should say, always sort of orient to the idea that right away, it's going to be really, really big and a lot because you don't even know your keywords yet, right? As Dr. Ellis was saying, you don't know what they're talking about. You also don't know what language they're using yet. So right away, it's going to be really broad, but that very quickly, what you're going to end up doing is going, all of this stuff having to do adults, that's not relevant. I'm sticking, I'm definitely going to stick with adolescents, maybe even young adolescents. Maybe I even decide, to narrow it further. But that what you're looking for as you're going through that process is getting to a sort of like a manageable literature, and that's an early thing that not all new researchers are oriented towards, and it can be quite overwhelming. But that once you've gotten to that manageable literature, you've got kind of a hunk of literature that you're going to end up going back and forth between broad searching, where you have all of your keywords in there, and very, very narrow searching. So you'll be writing a paragraph and realize there's kind of a gap there. You kind of made a logic jump or something, and you need something that links these two terms together. Well, you're going to go back to searching the literature. You're going to go back to literature review, but this time you're not just going to search your major keywords. You're going to search very narrow keywords that speak specifically to that little chunk. And that iterative process of going broad and then going quite narrow and going broad and then going quite narrow, side by side with a gradual narrowing of the literature until you've got something you can really contend with, that you can really use to contextualize your work. Because there's so much out there. So kind of sensitizing people to that process. You don't have to figure it all out at once, and you don't have to account for everything that's out there. Those are some of the steps that I think they're sort of ongoing with the steps that have been laid out already. And just to give people a feel for what that process is like, I think can be useful. I don't know that I would add any resources. I often start with Google Scholar because it's accessible and easy, and I'm always logged into the library. So I'm always taking advantage of those, those embedded links in the way that the two resources talk to one another. And I think that if I could amplify anything that's been said, it's that idea of going to the library. We're so oriented to living in this kind of virtual world. I don't think I've left my home in 2 years, but there are so many resources. I think it's one of our most underutilized resources at not just our university, but at universities in general, because there are folks who are experts, not necessarily in your topic area, but in the process of doing exactly what we're talking about. So I'd love to kind of poke at that again and say, the library is an important resource. Go physically, meet the people who are there to help you, let them help you, because they have expertise. We don't get trained to help people do that. We don't get trained in research or writing pedagogy. We get trained in psychology, or we get trained in kinesiology. They're actually trained in exactly this and how to teach it.
Absolutely. And so we talked a little bit about where, and Dr. Ellis, I'm coming right back to you because Dr. Santos jumped in. The next question was, when should we start? And she's already addressed some of that. But I'd like to put the ball back into your court, Dr. Ellis, and say, okay, so where the library to start, when, and also kind of add a little bit to that question to say, like, what are some of the expertise that students can find at the library?
Definitely. And you don't actually have to come to the library. We do have a lot of virtual resources. So we have our chat box that you can be, anywhere in the world and use our chat box. So if you can't come to the library or don't want to, that's fine. You can call us, text us in all types of ways. If you go to our website, it'll show you how to contact us. But like everyone said, we are we are trained in how to do research. We may not know your specific topic. So when a nursing student comes and has all these, keywords and jargon, I might not have a clue as to what they're researching, but I know how to find the articles to help you do that research. And that goes along with also realizing that not everyone uses the same jargon and terminology. So don't get stuck on, a medical term or a psychology term, because different people with different backgrounds all have expertise in the field and they talk about things differently. Same topic, same concept, but they use different wording. So that's very important in terms of kind of not being stuck in that field or subject that you think you're supposed to be searching in. Most most topics are going to be interdisciplinary at some point throughout the research process. But definitely, come here, talk to us. We can help you in terms of, finding what keywords might be best for you, finding what resources or where to find these resources that can help you. We can help you again in terms of organizing your research, how to do a bibliography, those type of things. Again, how to do different citation management styles, different platforms. If you're doing like a long-term research project where you want to do Zotero or something like that, where you want to somehow keep track of all your research, we can teach you ways to do that as well. And just generally any part of the process. And again, we may not know exactly what the topic is, but we can help you figure out how to research that topic and write a credible paper out of that.
Perfect. And thanks for sharing that. I have a question for Dr. Rena, but before I do that, Nirmal has a few questions that are in the chat and comments. So Nirmal, would you share with us?
Yes, sure. The first question is that what do you do if you find the gap in research but cannot find information on the particular gap?
So would someone like to
Would you, Dr. Santos, would you mind to answer this, please?
Sure. Yeah, this is such a common thing, and I'll point to a couple of things that have already been said. Dr. Ellis mentioned that idea of getting stuck on a particular word, and it happens all the time. So sometimes you know that you're not finding anything with the words that you would use to describe what it is that you're interested in. But the key is to find what is coming as close as possible. What words are people using that come as close as possible? I think this is also where I'll have students all the time that will say, well, there's nothing on this. And then I'll sit down and I'll search and I'll go, okay, here's 77,000 articles. And they'll go, what? What did you do? So making use of some of the resources around how different search engines work, like the searching, the actual specifics of, can you put in an and, can you put in an or, will it do a wildcard search, all of those particulars that change. So sometimes there either isn't a gap or the gap that you're seeing, you're not quite knowing how to wrap words around. But if there's a true gap, then I think you're exactly right. To the person who asked this, is that, depending on how big the gap is, there might be nothing that really gets at what you're trying to get at. So the easiest thing to do is find a little gap, is to find a spot that's very close to what's already been there. You can sort of imagine it like scaffolding. Enough of the literature has addressed something where you can kind of stand on it and reach out to your question. If your question is really far out there, which some of the most creative and innovative work can be really far from what's out there, then you end up having to bring in some of those other kinds of cases or justification that I talked about. You might end up saying what the data are in this area, but then making a theoretical or a philosophical or a logic argument to support or justify your particular research question or your particular methods, or both usually. And so this ends up being a little bit more of a challenge, I think, for new researchers. When I find a brand new researcher that has a really creative, innovative idea that they can't stand on the scaffolding of what's already been done and reach it, what I'll often tell them is that there's preliminary work that could actually start to build this program of research, but that you have to build from what's already there. So it can be discouraging or dissatisfying for somebody to take your big, beautiful, amazing research idea and they're telling you, this is great and wonderful. Also chop it in half, and then chop that in half, and then chop that in half, and that's your research paper, or that's going to be your master's thesis. Because oftentimes it's the most creative and innovative students that are going to be fabulous researchers that have these ideas that are a little too far from what's already there to really get their hands into. So often my advice is to do some of that preliminary work. And if you do end up, as I'm predicting, if you do end up loving research and that really being a place where you can thrive, having a million more ideas lined up right behind your very first project is a great way to build your program of research. And when I talk about that, what I mean is we're evaluated as researchers on the extent to which we have what we call a program of research, but kind of a coherent contribution to the literature where all of our work fits together. And the most productive researchers I know, they don't just have ideas lined up because they had something that was too far from the literature already. They have ideas lined up because that's the best way to keep the research going. So what I'll tell students is it's great. You have this big direction, you have this big, innovative, creative idea. It's a little far from what's already out there. So let's start collecting the preliminary data. And then when you finish that paper, your next paper will cite that one, and your third paper will cite those. And after you've got a couple of things out, other people are going to start helping to build on what you did, because that's what making a contribution to the literature does, is it embeds your work, your ideas in the rest of the literature and influences what everybody else is doing. One of the most exciting things for me, I'll share, and then I'll zip it, is when I was working on my dissertation, I had this big experimental idea and I was really struggling. It was very hard for me. It was kind of outside of my wheelhouse and it made me feel really dumb to work on it. And in the meanwhile, I had this other project that was not my dissertation, that was kind of a side project. It was about developing a measure for body image flexibility. And the experimental piece of work I was doing was in the same area, but I wanted to have a questionnaire because it would proliferate research. We could learn a lot more about it than this very slow human operant research that was really messy to do. I ended up actually very close to the end of my PhD. I was having some personal issues and struggling to get through. And my mentor said, "Why is this your dissertation? Why isn't this project that you're so excited about and spending all this time on, why isn't that your dissertation? You could still do this other project." So my dissertation ended up being this measure, developing this measure. And over time, what was so amazing about that was watching this self-report measure create a construct that wasn't in the literature before. That all of a sudden, the rest of all of my field that was interested in body image and interested in body image as it relates to health and well-being, now they had to contend with this new construct that had shown to be important in the areas that we were interested in. So all of a sudden, this thing that I felt like was a tiny little not important thing that I was kind of doing on the side at first, it became more and more exciting and ended up being really, really impactful in my field and creating this whole new construct that wasn't even there before. So I want to encourage students that sometimes you have this big, huge idea, and then the thing that feels like a little side project becomes the thing that creates the foundation for the rest of your work. It can be really hard to predict.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think the other thing that, I was thinking as you were speaking is that as you're using the literature, as you begin to search it and look at the abstracts, etc., you're also learning how to become part of that literature and become part of that story. And that's really awesome. And I know that Nirmal has a couple of other things. Him sitting here is reminding me that we have a few more to read. I'm going to read one. Nirmal and I are in the same room, so the feedback's a little bit much, and I'm worried it'll be on the recording. So I'm going to go ahead and read one. This one is for you, Dr. Ellis, and that is, when I go to the library, who do I speak to first, or do I start at the front desk? I'm looking for starting point inside the library instead of walking around aimlessly.
Good question. You can actually go to anybody and if they don't know the answer, they'll point you in the right direction. But generally, when you're doing research, your first stop is going to be the reference desk. So basically reference and research. And those are going to be the ones when you come into the library through the front door, it's the first desk on your right-hand side, and it'll say reference desk above it. And those are going to be the ones who are going to answer your questions, help you find those articles, help you, brainstorm those keywords, and those type of things. So reference desk is going to be generally your first stop for anything.
Okay, really wonderful, and thank you. And then actually the next question also is for you, Dr. Ellis, and that is, do we have any tools to help with biological or biometrics analysis in the library? To please and thank you.
Okay, not exactly sure what you mean by that, but if you're talking about like bibliographies type
Or
of thing.
bibliometrics, yeah, sorry, I can't.
So yeah, I just want to make sure that. So we do have, so again, we have research guides, but you can come to the reference desk or, chat us. So we have different resources in terms of organizing your research. So like Zotero is one of them, Mendeley. So they track your research. You can import, your items, your articles, things like that. And so they keep track of what you're using, that when you are ready to do a bibliography, either A, you can manually take out, the ones that you've used and put it into your research paper. A lot of them will have an export where you can export automatically the bibliography already formatted for you. On the library website, if you're doing your research and you find an article or you find a resource that you like, when you click on the title, it gives you all the information about that resource. And it also gives you the option to cite that resource. So it has a citation there for you in the format, whatever format that you need, MLA, APA, Chicago, so forth. So you can basically, to a certain extent, copy and paste it. Of course, you want to look at it to make sure everything is there, but you can copy and paste the citation directly from the library website. So all the information is already right there for you. And again, if not, you can always ask us. And then I believe the Writing Center also helps you with bibliographies as well. But we do have several tools that kind of does it for you. And it's also some things online like EasyBib and those things that if you put in the website or you put in information about your resource, it'll create the citation for you.
Absolutely, and thank you for that plug for the Writing Center. Just to let you know, first floor of Griffin Hall, they are wonderful. And I will tell you, a lot of times I've heard students say, well, I wasn't sure if I should go there. A lot of times students, especially undergraduates, think, well, I don't need to go ask for help until I'm really struggling. And I would argue, no, it's the other way around. You should ask for help right away. And that way you will never get to struggling. So I say with the Writing Center, with the Learning Center, with tutoring, mentoring, they're not life preservers. They are actually the boat. You get in there to start writing. It's for the journey to start out. So wonderful plug for them, and certainly use that. They can help you with those things. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and move to our next question. And thank you for those questions. They are wonderful. And this is for you, Dr. Rena. And that is, what are the common mistakes young researchers make in the literary search process?
Thank you so much for the question. And that is a very important question. And Dr. Sandoz already answered most of them with her explanation in the previous question which is asked. Like the most important mistake is the not developing the research question, which is very specific and measurable. If that is not measurable, like in a manner you want, then it is hard to find the literature, starts the literature source. And definitely the finding the appropriate research tools, source tools is important to find the related literature. So if you use a search engine which is not related to topics, you will not get any research article. As Dr. Sanders said, there is one student came and said there is nothing, and she got like 77,000. So that is a mistake usually the young researchers made. Also the current literature, the general rule of thumb we use like the within last 10 years. Some of them could be like more than that, which is like the key research or foundation research or theoretical foundation. As Dr. Sanders says that it could be a new things you started, as she started something that was a small project, but that become a research tools which may be used after 50 years. So you can use that things even though it is a 50 years old. Other than that, it has to be within 10 years, and rapidly changing discipline could be less than that. And when you are writing that annotation or synthesize, try to make it precise with argumental statement starts with, not like the description or just the summarize of that things. Also that we talked about the using data. When you are using data, make sure that it is a reliable and it is coming from the source, which is like appropriate data and reliable source. Don't use any data from anywhere. There is many out there in this world now. Like we don't have to go to the library, that's I do, to find anything. But now you can search with your fingertips and you can say, you can find in from many different sources. Some of them are not reliable. So make sure that the data you are using is reliable. And when you are writing the structure of your literature search, it has to have at least, like it must have 3 sections: introduction and body and the conclusion. And introduction will be defining what is your view of your literature search on your selected topics, then what are the reason you are doing it, and hook up with that what is there and what is not there, like the state of the scopes. And in the body, what we use the term in education, when I do my dissertation, we use it a funnel shape. You will be starting with the broad, then slowly narrowing down in your specific topics. So that's the things students sometimes make mistakes, and definitely it has to have a conclusion. Other thing is plagiarism. This is the term I have a hard time to pronounce it. So when the student writing that using other resources, sometimes they thought that I paraphrase that thing, so this does not has to be go anyone else. That is not true. If it is a direct quote or if it is a paraphrasing, you have to give the credit to the authors who create the piece of that evidence, that research, that scholarly work. So you have to give credit to that person. So those are the common mistakes. And again, like overthinking, as Dr. Sanders says, like don't try to do all in once. Follow the steps. Like one of my, like when I do the EDD, one of my instructors said that, how can you eat an elephant? The answer is one piece at a time. So if you consider the literature review is an elephant, you have to start eating one piece at a time and you will be finishing that things. Thank you.
Thank you. And that I love that. I love that last step. Just do it one piece, one little piece at a time. And I think the other thing that is important is to keep track, really keep track. They have all kinds of programs out there that you can put your literature into as you find it. Or, you can be old school, like I just love a piece of paper in my hand. I can't help myself. It doesn't really matter completely what system you're using, but you need to have a system. And I have a strong feeling that Dr. Ellis can help us with this. There are services out there, but as you are working, as you're adding, like it's a little piece at a time, but it can wind up being a really big stack. And then when you go to actually write your final paper or put your final work together, you're like, wait, I know I read that. I remember that. I know I want to reference that here and I can't remember who it was. And so it helps if you're organized from the start. So I think that was a mistake I made. So I had to throw that one in. My organizational skills sometimes need help. So and so I'm going to throw that one to Dr. Ellis and say, are there tools in the library for that?
We do have tools, not necessarily through the library, but we do have tools that we can recommend, again, like Zotero, which helps keep track. So basically what happens is as you're searching, you're adding your research that you want to keep to your Zotero account. And you can be at your computer, you can be any place else, you can log on, it's all online. And basically, so as you're adding in, it's keeping track of everything, is letting you know what's an article, Depending on what it is, it'll have the abstract, it'll have the links to it. You can add notes, different platforms have different little things you can do to it, but generally that's the idea of keeping track and, like having folders for different topics. So that way you don't have, a million articles, about your paper, but each one pertains to a specific subtopic. So you can kind of categorize those things to help you kind of narrow down, okay, I'm writing about this part of my paper right now. Let's focus on these resources, things like that. Like I said, it also helps keep track of, the worst thing is to do research and then not be able to find that one great paper that you found that had everything you wanted. And now you don't know where it is, you don't remember the title or the author, and now you're stuck. You might be crying because, oh my gosh, I need this paper. And now what do? Keep track of everything. Even if you don't think you'll need it right now, it was kind of good. I might look back at it. Keep it. Keep everything until you're for sure that you no longer need it. That's my number one thing.
Here, here. Okay, so we have one last question. Again, I don't see Nirmal hasn't turned on his camera, so we don't have any questions from the audience. Oh, it's on. Nirmal, do we have a question? He's like, nope. He's just saying hi. So he's keeping track.
I do want to add, not to cut you off, I do want to add to that last question about the bibliometric analysis. And now that I'm thinking about it, you might be talking about in terms of like how many times a paper was cited, how many people have actually used that paper. Things like Google Scholar, if you're looking at it, it'll show you cited by. So how many people actually said, oh, I might want to use it in my own paper. We also have for the library, we have Web of Science, which does the same thing. It kind of tells you how many people have used that research and quoted it and cited it in their own paper. So that kind of helps you. If you see that, this article had 1 million people cited it versus the next one only has 1. You might want to look at maybe why, just depending. But that kind of helps you determine, which articles might be better.
Okay, yeah, thank you. No, but feel free to cut me off anytime because I can always hear myself. So
I might add, Sherry, something that it's not a tool per se, how we might mean it, but kind of an underutilized resource. And that's peer researchers. So I have a lab, and one of the things that we do in my research lab is we put a lot of emphasis on bringing your needs to lab and resourcing one another's needs. When it's your topic, I think there's 2 pitfalls that can happen. One is that the rabbit hole. So, you start reading and then they cite this and you start reading that and they cite something and you start reading that. And then all of a sudden your project starts growing like, well, I need to measure this and I need to measure this and this person. And it can become like massive. Suddenly you don't even know what your thesis is anymore, or what your topic is. You don't really do that with other people's research. So, if it's not your topic, you tend to stay pretty close to that targeted literature review topic. So we'll sometimes have students, for example, switch, annotated bibliographies. They'll know, okay, Emily wants me, Dr. Sandoz wants me to elaborate the literature review on this topic and wants me, this person over here, to elaborate mine. And I'm so likely to get stuck in the rabbit hole. Maybe we can switch. We can do each other's little, searching for articles, and then we can switch articles and see and help each other that way. Just not having the risk of sort of losing track of what you're doing. Or if you're stuck, like if there's a particular point where you're getting stuck, you keep circling around the same way over and over again, handing it off to somebody else and saying, hey, could you give this a read? Is there a gap in there? Does this make sense? Am I using jargon, in a way that somebody that doesn't know it could still understand it? I think that sometimes we get really kind of siloed and on our own little islands as researchers. We can kind of get stuck in our own process. So bringing in somebody as a collaborator or just as a temporary support, I think is something that new researchers don't get enough training on doing and don't get modeled enough. So that's something that I try to do in my research lab, particularly around the literature review area, but really throughout the research process.
Yeah, and for undergraduates, one of the things that's real helpful is if you ask the graduate students in the labs you work in, if you ask the mentors, if you ask other graduate students who've been in the lab longer than you, they can point you to papers that have been really good places to start. I know with what I do, I have a set of like 4 papers that if you walk in my lab, I'm going to give those to you. And it's like, start here, read these. And then, that's the minimum. You got to do this. And a lot of laboratories have that. So even if it's not formal, informal, they'll say, hey, read these 4 or read these 6 or whatever. So, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to just sort of have the last question, which is sort of like a sum up question. And I'm going to pose that to each of you. And so let's go ahead and get that last question, which is, what are best practices, take home advice, tips for young researchers? Or I could reword that into, what's your final thought? And so we'll go ahead and start with you, Dr. Arena.
My take home advice will be, trust yourself in this process. And as I said, it could look like an elephant, but if you start eating it one piece at a time, you will do it. If you find the right resources, right place to go, right point to start, you can finish it. Thank you.
I love that. Dr. Ellis.
I'm kind of going over what Dr. Santos says. Research is a team sport. We're all here to help you, find your resources and, do that research. Now it's up to you on your own to actually, write and synthesize and evaluate those resources to do your paper. But we are all here, your peers, the librarians, your professors are all here to help you find those articles and find those resources that you need to ensure that you actually have a great paper.
Thank you. Yeah, I like team sport. I love that. Okay, so Dr. Santos.
I think what I would add is just, and folks that know me won't be surprising, my research area is in flexibility. It's be flexible. I think the transition from consuming knowledge to creating knowledge requires you to tolerate a lot of ambiguity. One article says something is a fact, and the article right next to it says that fact is totally wrong. I think being able to tolerate that ambiguity that's necessary in science, that's necessary as knowledge is continuing to evolve and develop. It can be quite exciting to find your research area doesn't have really clean, consistent definitions or positions on a topic. So, embrace that ambiguity, embrace the complexity, embrace that and recognize that that is part of moving from just consuming knowledge to actually creating knowledge, is being in those spaces where we don't know yet, or where we don't agree. And that can be a big shift. So yeah, be flexible in tolerating all that.
That is also spectacular. So the 3 of you, what wonderful final words. I thank you very much. And my final word is going to be really to promote the Student Center for Research, Creativity, and Scholarship. We are here in room 102 of the Dupree Library, which is when you come into the foyer instead of going to the main part of the library. If you go through the doors, they do not go to Narnia, nor do they go to St. Mary Street. They go to SCRCS, which is our center. We are promoting and managing the advanced program, which is a program that the staff and faculty and administration of the university has chosen to promote for the next 10 years. That's 10 years that supports students as they go through this process. So I thank all of our panelists for sharing their thoughts. I thank you for watching this, whether it's real time or whether you're watching it as a recording. And we encourage you to ask questions, go to the library, and when you enter into this place, you enter a student and you leave a scholar. And so with that, I think we're just going to thank you and sign off. And when I'm